Perfect.
Coming today, we are commemorating today's International Holocaust Memorial Day, which was established by the UN. And as I've told a couple of different people about when and how we should commemorate the Shoah, should it be as part of an international commemoration through the UN, which is keyed to, it was Monday was the day, and that's the anniversary in the Gregorian calendar of the liberation of Auschwitz. And so this is why this day was chosen. For many Jews, the idea of commemorating the Holocaust Day called for by the UN. Florence, there's some seats up here in the front. It'd be better. And to do it on a day that is on the Gregorian calendar doesn't make a lot of sense. And so the preference among many Jews is for Shoah, which happens about a week after Passover every year, and is called Yom HaShoah Ugvura, right? The day commemorating the Shoah and the bravery of the resistance. And that one, if I remember correctly, and I apologize if I don't, and people feel free to correct me, is linked to the liquidation of the Warsaw Ghetto. The uprising in the war. Thank you. In the uprising of the Warsaw Ghetto, right? To focus on the fact that there was resistance as well as victimhood among the people who suffered in the Holocaust. So today's program, as I said, is not. This is not Yom HaShoah, right? So it's not. It's also sort of appropriate, perhaps, to have a little bit more of a global look to it. So one of the elements that I'm bringing today has sort of a shall we say, not an exclusive focus on the Holocaust, and I'm interested to get your reaction to it. The vast majority of the material that I brought today comes from Lev Igolnikov, who is a resident next door at Cohen, and is very active at 1550 as a volunteer. And he put together a program for 1550 Beacon Street, the Goldman 1550 Beacon Street, that happened on Monday. It was a volunteer, it was a resident-run kind of a program, and he brought a lot of interesting material, some of which I'm bringing to you today, and some of it I chose myself. So I'm hoping that we'll have a little bit of time for anyone who feels comfortable to share their own experiences as as a survivor, as a relative of a survivor. And so if you would like to share your story, we do have a microphone. We can bring the microphone around, and we will close with the Amalei Rachamim that we say for the 6 million Jews who died in the Holocaust, and then we'll end with the Mourner's Kaddish. But we'll start with Elecha, the Nigun. The words we'll sing a wordless melody, but the words mean I call out to you, Adonai, and to Adonai I make my plea. Someone needs to get in here. Sorry. And it says then, listen, hear me, Adonai, and be gracious to me, Adonai, be help. Elecha, Adonai, please join me. Ya la 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 la, ya la la la. So since this is a day when we recall the liberation of Auschwitz, oh, don't worry about it. I want to make sure it's still paused. I thought that we would start with what for many people is the more familiar part of the Shoah, which is the camps in Poland, in Germany, the death camps, the concentration camps, the slave labor camps.
I can't hear you. Please use the mic.
I can't use the microphone, but I can talk louder. When I talk about things like this, my voice tends to get a little lower because it's difficult to talk about, obviously. So feel free to remind me to speak louder. So the first part today, we'll focus on the part of Europe, right, that the Germans decided to exterminate the Jews. And of course, not only the Jews, right, there were many other categories of people that were considered not worthy of being allowed to continue their lives. And so among them, the Roma, right, homosexuals, people who were have various disabilities, so on and so forth. But the primary, of course, the primary focus was the Jews, right, who were condemned to death for the simple crime of being born, as Levi Bulnikov put it the other day, being born of Jewish parents. That was enough for this to happen, right? And so one of the great chroniclers of the Holocaust in the American imagination, right, is Elie Wiesel. And so I thought I would read a short excerpt from his novel Night, right, which is a kind of novelization of his memoirs.
And how is that book?
I'm sorry?
How is that book?
It's a remarkable document. If you haven't read it, I strongly recommend it. I'll read from the beginning, which doesn't have to do with Auschwitz, but it does have to do with the sort of coming storm, so to speak. Elie Wiesel grew up in Hungary, right? And he was a very late victim of the Holocaust. It was only when the Hungarian government deported Hungarian Jews, right? What we're going to read about today was an earlier moment in the life of Hungarian Jewry. And I think it's particularly appropriate today because, as Rabbi Jonathan Sachs says, evil only happens when we allow it to happen. Right? And this was one of those moments where evil was happening, and people either didn't notice or didn't believe it or couldn't believe it, and so they didn't do anything to try to stop it. And then the evil, in this sort of famous phrase of Dietrich Bonhoeffer, right? Eventually, they came for me, right? And there was no one left for me, no one left to speak for me. So this is towards the beginning of his novel Night. And if you haven't read it, I do strongly recommend it. They called him Moshe the Beadle. The Beadle is the synagogue custodian, as though he had never had a surname in his life. He was a man of all work in a Hasidic synagogue. The Jews of Sighet, that little town in Transylvania where I spent my childhood, were very fond of him. He was very poor and lived humbly. Generally, my fellow townspeople, though they would help the poor, were not particularly fond of him. Moshe the Beadle was the exception. Nobody ever felt embarrassed by him. Nobody ever felt encumbered by his presence. He was a past master in the art of making himself insignificant, of seeming invisible. Physically, he was as awkward as a clown. He made people smile with his waif-like timidity. I loved his great dreaming eyes, their gaze lost in the distance. He spoke little. He used to sing, or rather to chant. Such snatches as you could hear told of the suffering of the divinity, of the exile of providence, who, according to the Kabbalah, awaits his deliverance in that of man. I got to know him toward the end of 1941, early in the war. I was 12. I believed profoundly. During the day, I studied the Talmud, and at night, I ran to the synagogue to weep over the destruction of the temple. So very interesting that Wiesel talks about the destruction of the temple here, because there are those who say that we should commemorate the Shoah not as its own separate catastrophe in Jewish history, but as one of the series of Jewish catastrophes in Jewish history, including the destruction of the temple. Yes, I see there's a cord here that I'm really trying to trip over. One day I asked my father to find me a master to guide me in my studies of the Kabbalah. You're too young for that. Maimonides said that it was only at 30 that one had the right to venture into the perilous world of mysticism. You must first study the basic subjects within your own understanding. My father was a cultured, rather unsentimental man. There was never any display of emotion, even at home. He was more concerned with others than with his own family. The Jewish community in Sighet held him in the greatest esteem. They often used to consult him about public matters and even about private ones. There were 4 of us children. Hilda was the eldest, then Bea. I was the third and the only son. The baby of the family was Tzipporah. My parents ran a shop. Hilda and Bea helped them with the work. As for me, they said my place was at school. There aren't any Kabbalists at Sighet, my father would repeat. He wanted to drive the notion out of my head, but it was in vain. I found a master for myself, Moshe the Beadle. He had noticed me one day at dusk when I was praying. Why do you weep when you pray? He asked me, as though he had known me a long time. I don't know why, I answered, greatly disturbed. The question had never entered my head. I wept because of something inside me that felt the need for tears. That was all I knew. Well, why do you pray? He asked me after a moment. Why did I pray? A strange question. Why did I live? Why did I breathe? I don't know why, I said, even more disturbed and ill at ease. I don't know why. After that day, I saw him often. He explained to me with great insistence that every question possessed a power that did not lie in the answer. People raise themselves towards God by the questions they ask, he was fond of repeating. That is the true dialogue. People question God and God answers. But we don't understand God's answers. We can't understand them because they come from the depths of the soul and they stay there until death. You will find the true answers only within yourself. And why do you pray, Moshe? I asked. I pray to the God within me that he will give me the strength to ask him the right questions. We talk like this nearly every evening. We used to stay in the synagogue after all the faithful had left, sitting in the gloom where a few half-burned candles still gave a flickering light. One evening I told him how unhappy I was because I could not find a master in Sighet to instruct me in the Kabbalistic texts, the secrets of Jewish mysticism. He smiled indulgently, and after a long silence he said, "There are 1,001 gates leading into the orchard of mystical truth. Every human being has his own gate. We must never make the mistake of wanting to enter the orchard by any gate but our own. To do this is dangerous for the one who enters and also for those who are already there." And Moshe the Beadle, the poor barefoot of Sighet, talked to me for long hours of the revelations and mysteries of the Kabbalah. It was with him that my initiation began. We were heart, but to extract the divine essence. And throughout those evenings, a conviction grew in me that Moshe the Beadle would draw me with him into eternity, into that time where question and answer would become one. And I am reading this entire passage because I think it's so important when we talk about the Holocaust, not to focus only on the violence and the destruction and the death, right, but also on the life that came before, right, about the culture and the society and the towns and the families that existed for generations and that were destroyed. So we know what it was we lost. Then one day, they expelled all the foreign Jews from Sighet, and Moshe the Beadle was a foreigner. Crammed into cattle trains by Hungarian police, they wept bitterly. We stood on the platform and wept too. The train disappeared on the horizon. It left nothing behind but its thick, dirty smoke. I heard a Jew behind me heave a sigh. "Hey, what can we expect?" he said. "It's war." The deportees were soon forgotten. A few days after they had gone, people were saying that they had arrived in Galicia. They were working there and were even satisfied with their lot. Several days passed, several weeks, several months. Life had returned to normal. A wind of calmness and reassurance blew through our houses. The traders were doing good business. The students lived buried in their books, and the children played in the streets. One day, as I was just going into the synagogue, I saw, sitting on a bench near the door, Moshe the Beadle. He told his story and that of his companions. The train full of deportees had crossed the Hungarian frontier and on Polish territory had been taken in charge by the Gestapo. There it had stopped. The Jews had to get out and climb into trucks. The trucks drove them toward a forest. The Jews were made to get out. They were made to dig huge graves. And when they had finished their work, the Gestapo began theirs. Without passion, without haste, they slaughtered the prisoners. Each one had to go up to the hole and present his neck. This was the forest of Galicia near Kolomaya. How had Moshe the Beadle escaped? Miraculously. He was wounded in the leg and taken for dead. Through long days and nights, he went from one Jewish house to another, telling the story of Malka, the young girl who had taken 3 days to die, and of Tobias the tailor who had begged to be killed before his sons. Moshe had changed. There was no longer any joy in his eyes. He no longer sang. He no longer talked to me of God or the Kabbalah, but only of what he had seen. People refused not only to believe his stories, but even to listen to them. He's just trying to make us pity him. What an imagination he has, they said, or even, poor fellow, he's gone mad. And as for Moshe, he wept. Jews, listen to me. It's all I ask of you. I don't want money. I don't want pity. Only listen to me, he would cry between prayers at dusk and the evening prayers. I did not believe him myself. I would often sit with him in the evening after the service, listening to his stories and trying my hardest to understand his grief. I only felt pity for him. They take me for a madman, he would whisper, and tears like drops of wax flowed from his eyes. Once I asked him this question: why are you so anxious that people should believe what you say? In your place, I shouldn't care whether they believe me or not. He closed his eyes as though to escape time. You don't understand, he said in despair. You can't understand. I've been saved miraculously. I managed to get back there. Where did I get the strength from? I wanted to come back to Sighet to tell you the story of my death so that you could prepare yourselves while there was still time. To live, I don't attach any importance to my life. I'm alone. No, I wanted to come back and to warn you. And see how it is? No one will listen to me.
Is that from Night?
That's for night. At this point, we'll play, just take a few minutes, 2 moments of silence while I set this up. So as we remember Elie Wiesel and Moshe the Beadle, who tried to warn people.
Was Elie Wiesel the one that Moshe the Beadle taught?
No.
So, as you know, there were several death camps. One of them was called Buchenwald.
That was a good one.
I'm sorry?
That's a well-known one.
Yes. So, in the Soviet time, right, and this is, as I said before, this program today is very much informed by the program that Lev Igolnikov put on Monday with a lot of Russian language materials. So there'll be some Russian language materials here. So there was a song that was written in the 60s, I think, when the Soviet Union began to really acknowledge and struggle with the reality of the Holocaust. Not necessarily so much on their land, although we'll get to that in a minute, but certainly with what happened in Europe. And so this is a story. This is a song that was written by the music was written by a guy named Muradeli, and the lyrics were by Alexander Sobolev. And this is a performance of it by the Red Army Choir.
In the film, are those Nazis or
Those are Soviet soldiers.
are those
Those are in World War II parlance. Those are our allies. Already by the 60s, of course, it was more complicated. And this song, right? What this song is really about World War II.
Yes.
It's not only about the Holocaust.
Yes, it is.
It's about World War II, and so which is for the Soviet perspective are going to be intertwined at all times.
Jim, can I?
So the Russian is on the front page, and the English, which is not my English, it's on the second page.
Right.
All right, so we'll hear it in Russian, sung by this baritone. So we will let's read it together in English on the second page. The people of the world, stand up a moment. Listen, listen. It buzzes from all sides. It can be heard in Buchenwald, ringing off the bells, ringing off the bells. It's innocent blood reborn and strengthened in a brazen roar. Victims are resurrected from the ashes. And they rise again, and they rise again, and they rise, and they rise, and they rise again, and they rise, and they rise, and they rise again. Hundreds of thousands burned alive, who form, rose one by one. International columns speak with us, speak with us. Can you hear the thunder roll? This is neither a storm nor a hurricane. This is the turmoil of nuclear terror, the groans of the ocean, the Pacific Ocean. It groans, the Pacific Ocean. It groans, the Pacific Ocean. People of the world, stand up a moment. Hear, hear, it buzzes from all sides. It can be heard in Brookline. The bells are ringing, the bells are ringing. The ringing is carried by the wind over the whole earth, and Heather is busy with excitement. People of the world, be very careful. Preserve peace, preserve peace, preserve, preserve, preserve peace. Preserve peace, preserve, preserve, preserve peace. All right, so we will.
Слава Соболева, Бухенвальдський навад. Люди мира не встаньте. Слушайте, людей со всех сторон. Это раздается в Бухенвальде. Колокольный звон, колокольный звон. Это возвратилось небо. В этом звоне памятных вновь. Это жертвы ожили с пепла. И восстали вновь, и восстали вновь, и восстали, и восстали, и восстали. Интернациональные колонны. Станки говорят, станки говорят, слышите, колонны расправы. Это не гроза, не ураган, это вихри атомных ядер. Станет океан, синий океан, это стонет, синий плывет над всей землей. И путем свободном эфир. Люди мира, будьте сочек трое. Берегите мир, берегите мир, берегите, берегите, берегите.
So, some reactions, comments about that? Yeah.
This was after Stalin had all of the Yiddish cultural people murdered in 1952.
Exactly.
The people who fled from the Nazis into Russia were put into the Russian concentration camps. You know,
But many of them survived if they went to Russia.
yeah, they had
Yes.
a
They
higher
survived.
yeah, they had a 1/3 survival rate in the Gulag, as opposed to a 95% death rate in the camps.
Right. I mean, many Soviet citizens of who were Jews and the Soviets knew that they would be killed, right, were evacuated to all kinds of places in the east, right? Some of them were put in camps, but most of them were evacuated to eastern cities, and many of them made lives for themselves and never came back. So, for instance, in Uzbekistan, there was a great deal of harmony among the Muslim, the Christian, and the Jewish residents in Uzbekistan, because they were all escaping the same place. Yeah, go ahead, Alan.
The Jews came in and fled to the Russian line.
Yeah, yeah.
That's what it's true.
Yeah, an amazing story. Yeah, go ahead, Sandy.
You said this was a novel. He wrote this book when he was 16 years old in Yiddish.
But then he
And
wrote.
der Welt hat geschwiegen. The world was silent.
Mhm. You're talking about Elie Wiesel.
Elie Wiesel,
Yes,
he's
right.
the one who wrote the
Yes.
book.
Yes, but he then rewrote it in French as
Right,
as a novel. And
16-year-old.
right, so this is not the same text. Right, this is not the same. Where the text that I wrote is not the text of a
It's not
16-year-old.
what he wrote.
Right, and it's translated from French, not from the Yiddish. It's a different. I mean, I haven't seen the one you're
Well,
mentioning.
I'm talking about it,
Yeah.
and I knew people from Signet.
Oh, did you? Yeah. Wow, it's intense.
Well, I think everybody here knew somebody.
Yes, right. Many of us knew, have had the honor of knowing people who survived, and or we're survivors ourselves, some of us, and so but I think it's very interesting to see from the Soviet perspective, right, as you're pointing out, right, that this was at a time, right, where being Jewish was not really okay in the Soviet Union, right? It was okay to be Russian, right? And so many Jews did everything they could to get the word Jew taken off of their passport and to have some other nationality put on. One of the reasons why so many Jews were freaked out when there was a hint, right, that the current administration would seem to be making Jew into a nationality, right, or an ethnicity in this country, regardless of of your other opinions about these things. And also very interesting, right, that in this text, right, Buchenwald and the Holocaust, right, are sort of compared or equated somehow with the nuclear terror in Japan, right, and so it turns into kind of a plea for saving the world from nuclear weapons, which is a little bit ironic, and it's coming from the Red Army, right? But irony was usually lost on the Soviet regime.
But there was a whole generation of refugees
Yes,
who were able to get here in the 70s.
but this is right. This is a decade after this, right, or more than a decade after this. This is 1962.
It's also a very moving song called "We Are Leaving Mother Russia."
Yes,
We
right.
waited far too long.
Exactly. That was written in the 80s or the 90s, I think, by a local guy, actually. Yeah. All right. The piece I would like to bring you is called Babi Yar, and I'm bringing you this because this is not necessarily the Holocaust Memorial at Goldman, and I thought it was so interesting. So Babi Yar is a poem by Yevgeny Yevtushenko, who is a Russian/Ukrainian. His name is Ukrainian. In the poem, he calls himself a Russian. So I'll read a little bit of it in Russian so you get a sense of what it sounds like, and then I'll read it to you in a translation that I found. This is not my English. Над Бабьим Яром памятников нет. Крутой обрыв, как грубое надгробие. Мне страшно. Мне сегодня столько лет, как самому еврейскому народу. Мне кажется, вот я приду по древнему Египту, и вот я на кресте распятый гибну. И до сих пор на мне слезы, следы гвоздей. Мне кажется, что Дрейфус – это я, мещанство, мой доносчик и судья. Я за решеткой, я пропал, кольцо, затравленное, оплеванный, оболганный, и дамочки с брюссельскими оборками, держа зонтами, течут мне в лицо. So Baba Yar is a ravine outside of Kiev, where 150,000 Jews were taken and shot and put into this ravine, right, and then covered over. This was written, I think, also in 1962, and it was sort of a scream from a Russian person about the fact that the the Soviet government had not really acknowledged the role of the Soviets and local Ukrainians in all of this, or even that it had happened. At Baba Yar, no memorial presides. A rough and looming cliff is the tombstone. I am frightened. I'm old today. The tides of ages join my years with the Jewish peoples. It seems to me that now I am a Jew. Ancient Egypt, the scene of questing wonder, that was I nailed to the cross on Calvary yonder. Until today, the marks of nails I show. It seems to me that Dreyfus I've become. The shyster turns me in, down turns his thumb. I'm cast in prison. There is no escape. I'm despised, rejected, and grief acquainted. And so the crowds of ladies, oh so fashionable, with their umbrellas stabbing, gape at me. It seems to me I'm a youngster in Bialystok. The blood it pours, it's spreading on the floors, ringleaders rampant empty shelves of a tavern, of vodka, onion, they reek from pillaged stores. Boots I've discarded, I'm completely powerless. In vain for mercy, I plead for mercy from the thugs. A storeman, beat the Yids, save Russia, he snorts. By force with thy mother, he satisfies his needs. Beloved Russian folks, I know you well. An internationalist you are in essence, but often the dirty-handed beggars, the pureness of your name they besmirch. I know the goodness of your rich black earth, disgusting that without demur or flinching, anti-Semites survived the purge, and now call themselves the Union of the Russians. It seems to me that I've become Anne Frank, diaphanous, like a twiglet fresh in April. And so I love. I need no special phrase. I only need us to gaze at one another. How little eyes can see and how little noses can smell. And forbidden to us the leaves and sky, one gesture now remaining. Gently we can embrace in the darkened room as day closes. Are they coming here? Don't be afraid. That's the rumbling of spring approaching. She's coming toward us now. Come here to me, lips pressed to mine, no stumbling. Is that the door? That's the crack of ice reproaching us. At Baba Yar, there's a rustle of wild time. The towering trees look down so sternly in their judgment, and all the silence screams. Holding my cap, I'm feeling sick, my cheeks pallid, and I'm like an endless, soundless screech over the thousands and thousands buried here. I am every old man shot in this ditch. I am every little child whom they murdered. This will be etched forever in my memory. International will ring out loud when all the anti-Semites have been buried. Expunged from earth this filthy, wicked crowd. You'll say my blood is not theirs, and it's true. But I am despised, meaning I have no Jewish blood in me. But I'm despised with the passionate, hardened hatred by anti-Semites as if I were a Jew. And that's why I am authentically Russian. So has anyone heard that before? Is that new to you?
No, anyway.
So very interesting, how there's this sort of idea that an authentic Russian person, right, will be as hated by anti-Semites as Jewish people. Right? And that people who are anti-Semitic are not truly Russian. They don't really deserve to be called Russians. True, not true, I'm not here to judge, right?
Well, he got into a great deal of trouble.
A
with the
lot of trouble.
authorities for
He
this
got
poem.
Right, he got into a lot of trouble, right? Because he said, right, all these anti-Semites survived the purges, right? And now they're the bosses, right? While the Jews, right, are lying low or running scared. Right? Go ahead, Alan.
Like you guys, there was an item in the paper yesterday, the Globe, where the son of Bernard Montgomery got friendly with the son of Erwin Rommel. And their both fathers were fighting each other.
Yeah.
75 years ago. And
Yeah.
They sort of took a liking to each other.
Right.
I-
Well, I think it's so important, right, to remember that the descendants of the people who perpetrated the Holocaust, right, are their descendants. They're not the perpetrators themselves, right? And that's one of the reasons why we're so honored and lucky to have people like Leander come with us, to be with us, right? To
Yes.
learn with us, to hear from our experiences, and for us to learn from Leander, right, about what it's like to be a German young person today, right? Because we know that the generations change, right? Sometimes things get better, sometimes they get worse, but we always pray, right, that we will have the strength, as Moshe the Beadle says, right, that we'll have the strength to ask the right questions and to do what we can to make sure that evil doesn't happen.
I hated Germans.
I'm sorry?
I hated Germans until, this was when I was a teenager, in my early 20s.
Louder, please.
I met some of the 15-year-olds who had been handed rifles and been told to go defend Berlin.
Oh, wow.
And you think, how can I hate this person?
Right. Did you hear that, Sandy?
Yeah.
Yeah, great. But it's often true, right, that when we meet people and encounter them as human beings, right, it's a very different experience than when we have a sense of them as just being enemies. All right, so now we will have a few minutes for anyone who would like to share thoughts or reflections on this and of one second, bro. I'm going to hand you the microphone so you don't have to yell.
I have two things to say. First of all, I ended up teaching German students through the EF Corporation. They came over and I taught them English, and I made sure that they worked. And some of them say had been to different countries, but I gave them puzzles, I gave them everything else, and I went with them in immersion to different places, New York City, to the Jersey Shore, whatever. And the other thing that I just said to the rabbi, my husband, the late Saul Goldwasser, was a professor of philosophy and sociology at Mercer County Community College. He began there when they began to start the community colleges in New Jersey, coming over from Trenton State. And in 1991, there was the New Jersey Commission of Holocaust that was formed with Dr. Paul Winkler and others. And during that time, they began setting up Holocaust centers in most of the 21 counties of New Jersey. And he was helpful having exhibits, traveling exhibits, and I mentioned this to Rabbi, of hidden children, of Torahs from Susisha, I probably mispronounced that, in Czechoslovakia. And we saw exhibits of Saving by Raoul Wallenberg, whatever. So this is going on, and eventually it changed to the Holocaust Genocide Program, and they looked online, of course, and they still carry on with different people now because some have passed. And it's still a mandate to teach education in New Jersey on an appropriate school level. They had 3 levels: elementary, junior high, and high school.
I would like to point out New Jersey was the first state who mandated
Right.
a
Well,
Holocaust education.
Barbara was
As
saying
of
that.
now,
Right.
we have 12 states
Right.
that do it.
That's
So
it.
there are many states that don't.
Right. Right, and I think that these days, we're definitely worried about people not remembering, right? People don't remember, yeah.
This may make me very unpopular, but who remembers the Armenians, which is what Hitler apparently said? In our lifetime, not only our own Holocaust, all my life I have known people who survived the camps, who managed to get to Latin America, who managed to get to Japan. But what did we do about the Rwandans? We may somehow have the consciousness to perpetuate our own Holocaust, but we have to remember in some way that we are a part of Holocausts that took place before us, that are taking place now, that will take place in the future. And I don't know how we resolve this, because we need our own memories, but at the same time, we somehow have to incorporate other people who have gone through the same horrific experiences.
I'll make it very,
Nope, turn it off.
Turn it off.
Yeah, there we go.
well, I'll make it very short. They said it went into the Holocaust genocide, and they had things on Rwanda, they had things on Armenia. So they are carrying forth,
I think,
and that's all.
yeah, no, that's fine. I think that in, that it's a very vexed question, right? It's a very vexed question. There is something extremely specific about the Holocaust, right? The totality of the Nazi plan to do away with all Jews everywhere, right? Most other genocides are not quite so total, right? They're bad enough without that. That's not to diminish them. It's not to deny them, right? But I think you're absolutely right. We always need to balance out, right, the fact that our experience, like every experience, is unique, and it has connections with other people's experiences. And so, yeah, Leonard, can you speak louder, or do you want the microphone?
I think I can speak loud. Yeah, I think you're very right, because the planning of the Holocaust and this kind of how it planned is so different to so many other bad things. I mean, it's very good to remember the other bad things to the Armenians or whatever, but this, how big the Holocaust was and is, I think that's, so yeah.
Yeah, and I do think that also there's a way in which it's not in any way to deny the horror of other genocides, to recall that what is often forgotten about the Holocaust, right, is that it was motivated by anti-Semitism. And anti-Semitism is something that tends to pop up in times of great stress. And we are in a time of great stress right now in the life of our country and in the life of the world. And lo and behold, anti-Semitism, which many of us had sort of hoped had been kind of on the way down, right, has now resurfaced as something that's really, really frightening. And it doesn't just, I think the thing about anti-Semitism, it does not just affect the Jews, right? It affects everybody. Go ahead, Marbeth.
My father's mother sent 700 Jewish people from Germany, because I never knew where my father came from. I never asked. From Germany to California. And then we met them when I got married,
Yes,
and it was fabulous.
that's wonderful. So we're going to sing this song right now, and then I will sing. Actually, I think we'll do it in the other order. We'll sing this after we say Kaddish. So, Leonard, would you hand out the brown books, the ones we use for Mincha, the brown ones?
Yeah, you want. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
But you want the stream?
Yeah, no, you can keep it going.
Okay.
And I'll come around.
Thank you.
Oh, you already gave it. Somehow I'm getting myself in some ways. Highlight. All right, so this is El Malay Rachamim, that we say in memory of the 6 million Jews who perished in the Holocaust. Exalted, compassionate, please rise as you are able. There's no page, don't worry, this is just, I'm just gonna read it to you and then I'll sing it and then we'll say Kaddish in the Brown Book. Please rise as you are able. Exalted, compassionate God, grant perfect peace in your sheltering presence among the holy and the pure, to the souls of all our brethren, men, women, and children of the house of Israel who were slaughtered and suffocated and burned to ashes. May their memory endure, inspiring truth and loyalty in our lives. May their souls thus be bound up in the bond of life. May they rest in peace. And let us say, Amen. El Malay Rachamim, Shohem B'Meromim, Amseh Menucha Neona, Tachet Kanfei HaShekhinah, B'ma'alot Kedoshim U'Tehorim, Zohar Rakia Masirim, Et Nishmot Kol Acheinu B'nei Israel, Anashim, Nashim V'Tzam, Shenitbehu V'shenechnetu V'shenisrefu V'shenerbu V'gan Eden Menuchatam Ana Barachamim Astichem B'Seiter Knafecha L'Olamim Utzro B'Tzrachayim Nishmotehem Adonai Nachlatam V'Yanuchu B'Shalom Mishkavotehem V'Nomar Amen. So we'll turn in the Brown Book. We will turn to page 154. 154. Please join me. Yud Gedal, the Yud Gedal. Yamad Yibrach Yotei, Yamlit Malkotei. Echayechon U'Yemechon, U'Chayei Necho Beit Yisrael, Ba'agala U'Bizman Karim, V'Yivru, Amen. Yehei Shmei Rabba V'Barach, V'Alam V'Mei. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh v'yitadar v'yitaleh v'yitallah shemei tekudshah v'riyah le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata tushbechata v'nechemata da'amiran v'yolamah v'yimru amen. Yehei shvama rabba min shemayim v'chaim aleinu v'yalko Yisrael דיברו,
Amen.
עלינו, כל ישראל,
Israel.
דיברו.
Amen.
You may be seated. So we will finish our program today with Zog Nit Kaimel, which we will sing in Yiddish and then in English. A song that was written by the tune is an old melody by a guy named Cross. I don't know anything more about him than his name. It was the words were written by a guy named Hirsch Glick, who was he was part of the Warsaw Ghetto uprising, and he wrote this song as part of it. And he was caught by the Gestapo after the liquidation and sent to a concentration camp. He managed to escape and joined the Red Army in fighting the Germans and was killed in battle. So we will sing this song. So nicht ein Post, du gehst im letzten Weg. O zum Weihen verstehen heute. Kommen wird noch unser Rechte schon. Es wird erbeugt und unser Brot mir seinen Lohn. Kommen wird noch unser Rechte schon. Es wird erbeugt und unser Brot mir seinen Lohn. Von grünem Palmenland bis weißen Land in Schnee. Wir kommen um mit unserer Leib unsere Welt. Und wo gefallen sie, so spricht von uns der Blut. Das Brot sind Bett dort unter Cora unser Wut. Und wo gefallen sie spricht von uns der Blut. Das Brot sind Bett dort unter Cora unser Wut. Es wird im Morgen bei Hilden unser Hängt. Und der Berg im Bett verschwinden mit dem Feind. Nur euch zusammen wird die Sonne dem Kajor. Via Caroso gehen, das Lied von so zu Tor. Via Caroso gehen, das Lied von so zu Tor. Via Caroso gehen, das Lied von dort zu Tor. Das Lied geschrieben ist mit Blut und mit Blut. Sie ist dort kein Bild von der Vogel auf der Feld. Das hat der Vogel zwischen Fall dicke Welt. Das Lied gesungen mit ner Garnes in die Hand. Das hat der Vogel zwischen Fall dicke Welt. Das Lied gesungen mit ner Garnes in die Hand. So soll ich einmal du gehst den letzten Weg. Was immer in Reihen verstehen neuen Tag. Kommen wird noch unser Reusgepäckte schon. Es wird erbeugt und unser Brot mehr sein Dom. Kommen wird noch unser Reusgepäckte schon. Es wird erbeugt und unser Brot mehr sein Dom. Never say you're going on your final road. Go letting skies block out blue days. Our long for hour will yet come. Our step will beat out, here we are. Our long for hour will yet come. Our step will beat out, we are here. From a green palm, from a land of green palm trees to the white land of stone. We arrive with our pain, with our woe. Wherever a spurt of our blood fell, on that spot shall spurt forth our courage and our spirit. Wherever a spurt of our blood fell, on that spot shall birth forth of courage in our spirit. The morning sun will brighten our day, and be yesterday will despair with our foe. But if the sun delays to rise at dawn, then let this song be a passport for generations to come. But if the sun delays to rise at dawn, then let this song be a password for generations to come. This song is written with our blood and not with lead. It is not the song of a free bird flying overhead. Amid crumbling walls, the people sang this song with grenades in their hands. Amid crumbling walls, the people sang this song with grenades in their hands. So never stay the road now ends for you. Although skies of the dark and days of blue, our love for our will yet come. Our step will be down, we are here. Our love for our will yet come. Our step will be down, we are here. Thank you, everyone, so much for being part of this commemoration.
Thank you.
And I'm sorry we went a little bit late, but we will not